every team should have the mindset of championship or bust to get that Larry O'Brien, but ultimately that's not realistic for 29 other teams. So today, let's peel back the curtain and start this amazing series. What would be a successful season for all 30 NBA teams? Today, let's talk about it. We're going to dive into the West. We're going to start here with the Grizzlies. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, if this is your first time here, of course, we do a lot of things like this. Of course, a lot of creative content. So if you enjoy, drop a like and consider subscribing to the channel. And of course, turning on those post notifications. But let's get into the Grizzlies here. This is a team that their Vegas winning line is at 46.5. And if you ask me, I think that is low. And I'm going to be betting the over on the Grizzlies this upcoming season. Now, this is a team that when they were healthy in this Ja Morant era, they've been a dominant regular season unit. They've been a team that's been a top 2 seed, top 3 seed, as you see in the bottom left of your screen. Now, they're going to be healthy, of course, going into next year. At this point in time, they currently are. Of course, their core is Ja Morant, Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., no longer Steven Adams, but Brandon Clark should be making his return. They bring in a guy like Zach Edey. This team should be as healthy as they've been in some time. And I'm excited to see what they can do. Now, I'm not a big Ja Morant fan, but I think he could be in the running for the MVP this season, as crazy as that might sound. But you see your 6 different options. We have the Cooper Flag tier. Of course, just to be in the position to get a guy like that to turn your franchise around is a possibility. A play-in appearance, a top 6 seed / kind of just happy to be there, kind of happy to be in the playoffs. To win a playoff series, top 3 seed, and a conference finals appearance. For the Grizzlies, look, Ja Morant only played 8 games last year because of his situation off the court, and also he came back and got injured, and this whole team just had injuries all last season. To come back healthy this year, to prove all the haters wrong, I think a successful season for the Grizzlies would be a top 3 seed. I think going to be a top 3 seed, reminding the world who you are again, maybe again, just winning a playoff series, making it a tough 6 or 7 game series in the second round against one of those heavy hitters in the Western Conference. I think just putting the world back on notice about who we are and the potential that we have would be a successful season for Ja Morant and company. Let's talk about the Lakers. They're on the thumbnail. You knew we were going to talk about them. And, if I take away the fact that they have a 39-year-old player that might be considered the greatest player of all time, and then you put a running mate next to him that might be a top 10 player in the league, 2 now Olympic gold medalists on this roster. They brought in a new head coach in JJ Redick. How is he going to do in his first year? We gotta wait and see, right? But this is one of the deeper rosters in the league. Again, they're led by, like I mentioned, arguably the greatest of all time. If you take away that factor of the 39-year-old LeBron James, I think just winning a playoff series for this Lakers team would be a successful season. Again, you've been there, but you haven't been able to get over the hump really since your championship year. That might be the last time they've won a playoff series. I'd have to go back and look. But of course, bottom left of your screen, this is a team that's been 11th, 7th, and 7th. Excuse me. That's not the last time they won the playoff series. They made it to a Western Conference Finals just a few years ago. But really, again, winning a playoff series, I think, would be a successful season. But outside of that, because of the LeBron James factor, look, it's got to be a conference finals appearance. You got to be able to get there and give your 39-year-old superstar a chance to once again put a team on his back, to take that extra step and to get to the finals, to give him, again, a chance at a 5th NBA championship. So if you're Genie Bust in the Lakers, it's just a normal season for you. It's championship or bust. And again, I hate to already go back on that statement, but because of the LeBron James factor, it's championship or bust. You need to just put yourself in a situation to give your guys a chance to get over the hump. AD, LeBron James, they need that chance. Let's talk about Wemby, the guy that could be on his trajectory to be in that GOAT conversations. But this is a team that is at 36.5 wins. So everybody's expecting them to take this big jump. Of course, you still have solid role players like Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, who's underrated. Of course, you bring in Stephon Castle in the draft, and then you bring in a 39-year-old leader in Chris Paul. I think that's an underrated pickup this offseason. No, I don't think he's going to be this, version of himself that we saw in, let's say, OKC. I don't think he has that much juice left in the tank. But what I do know is that we can get that to a lesser degree here in San Antonio. And there was so many clips last year and just so many opportunities where Victor Wembanyama is running right down the middle of the lane at 7'4". Somehow, some way, he was missed on some opportunities, right, for this offense. Chris Paul's not going to mess that up. He's going to get the ball to Wemby. He's going to put Wemby and all these other superstar or younger players in situations to succeed, right? I think we see maybe the best overall season from Devin Vassell this year. I think we see Keldon Johnson that is a little bit more efficient from the outside. And of course, we get to see that next step from Wemby, all because of Chris Paul. Now, I do worry, is there going to be a minute restriction on a guy like Victor Wembanyama this year? Last year, of course, there was. This year, if things get off to a slow start, do we immediately go back to that minute restriction? Something that I am a little bit worried about for Wemby's development, but he's still an amazing player. He's still probably going to be in the Defensive Player of the Year running this year. If they can win 40 games, I think you give the award to Victor Wembanyama because of how dominant he is on that side of the ball. But I think a successful season for them, all in all, would be to make the play-in and, of course, give Wemby a chance to be a 7 seed, to be an 8 seed, right? To go out there and have some of these young flashes of greatness, but at a higher stage here. And again, that would be in the playoffs. I mean, even if they're the 10 seed and they make it to the 8 seed and they get swept in the first round, I think that's still a successful season for how young this San Antonio's team is. So a play-in appearance to give Wemby a chance to take that greatness step, I think would be a successful season. For Sacramento, you had a somewhat busy offseason. Of course, you bring in a guy like DeMar DeRozan, and we talk about it a lot. Who is going to sacrifice and how much is going to be sacrificed by some of these star players? I think that guy has to be De'Aaron Fox. I think that's a guy that has only been a career 33% three-point shooter. We're going to need him to be up to 36, 37%. And he's going to have to be that guy next to Keegan Murray that provides such an elite outside threat to give guys like Sabonis and DeMar DeRozan to be their best versions of themselves on a nightly basis. Now, 2 years ago, this team shocked the world. They went all the way to be a 3 seed, lost in the first round. But of course, this past season, it was a bit of a down season. Now, they had some injuries and some depth issues along the way. But of course, they ultimately fell short of their goal, which was making the playoffs last season. Now, I think a successful season for them wouldn't be, I don't expect them to go out there with DeMar DeRozan and be a Western Conference contender. I think they have the potential to be, but usually bringing in a guy like DeMar DeRozan or a star player of his caliber, it takes a year to mesh with the big three, right? The Kings with Fox, Sabonis, and DeMar. It might take a year to, finally figure out what exactly do we need to do to maximize all three of us. And again, we saw that with the Suns last year and many big threes in the past. It sometimes takes a year or so to maximize what you have. But I think for the Kings to be a top 6 seed, right, to avoid the play-in and to, just compete in the first round of the playoffs, I understand it's not exactly what you want as far as winning goes, right? But I think, being a top 6 seed, last year you were for a majority of the season. You couldn't quite, finish the season out the way you wanted, and you ultimately fell into the play-in, and we know how that went. But I think being a top 6 seed, let's say you go in the first round series against like the Minnesota Timberwolves. If you could take the Timberwolves to 7 games in the first round, I think that would be a successful season. Again, in year 1 of this new big three there in Sacramento. But again, I'm a big Sabonis fan. I'd like to see him go farther, but I think a successful season is where I have him. For the Thunder, the youngest 1 seed in NBA history last year, led by a top 10 player in the league in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I can imagine he's going to be a popular MVP bet this upcoming season. But last year, of course, like I mentioned, shocked the world, went to the second round of the playoffs, and if they didn't run into a man on a mission, they could have went further. But again, I think this is a team that has it all. You have a good roster last year. If they just ran it back, I think I would have them going to a similar situation where I'm going to have them here in a second. But then you bring in Alex Caruso, an all-NBA defender. You bring in a great facilitating big and a guy like Isaiah Hartenstein. It's going to open up this offense a lot more, right? A lot more than I think people are giving credit for. And Caruso with Lou Dort on the perimeters, it's going to be a headache, right? Shai's not a bad defender himself. I just don't see a flaw in this team outside of a little bit of chemistry and continuity. But it's not like Hartenstein and Caruso demand the ball, more than a lot of other players that they could have brought in. So I think if you're the Thunder, you have your superstar. Now we want to see a little bit of a step from J Dub or Chet or both, right? If both of them happen, this is going to be the runaway number one seed in the West. Um, but I think just with everything that you brought in, with how good your core was last year, I think you make a conference finals appearance, even if you get there and even if you lose, you took another step, right? You got to the conference finals. You were a Final Four team, one of the top two teams in your conference, which is a loaded conference, as we all know in the West. But again, I think making the conference finals, successful season for the Thunder. For the Rockets, they're an interesting team. Last year, Sengun kind of broke out, and he looked to be like the go-to guy for this team going forward. But then when Sengun went down, ironically, this team looked like they were playing their best basketball with Jalen Green as their guy and Sengun out. I think it's a good problem to have if you're the Houston Rockets. I think you're in a situation where you have a 1A, 1B situation. You don't have a necessarily lead guy, of course, throughout the season. That could be, again, a good or a bad thing, depending on who you ask. But I think 43 and a half is a crazy line. I think we're going to have to see exactly how the money plays out on that. Not that that is important for today's video, just something that I like to look out for. I think the biggest thing I'm looking out for this year for the Rockets is, for one, I think a top six seed for them would be a successful season. The way you were able to close out last year, to be, to go on that crazy of a run, second half of the year, really the last month of the season, to really give the Warriors a run for their money after it looked like you weren't even in the picture of the play-in, I think would be, would be awesome. Now, I will say at the bare minimum, I think being a 7 or an 8 seed would be a successful season, just making the playoffs with this young core. But I believe that Jabari Smith can take a breakout jump this year. Again, we need him to be that Michael Porter for this team. You have your baby baby Jokic in Sengun. You have your baby Jamal Murray in Jalen Green, if not better. You need your third star. You need that guy that can bail those two guys out if they don't have it going. And that is Jabari Smith to me. And I want to see it happen. I think this year could be a big year for him. I think if he improves his outside shot, it's only going to open up this offense to degrees and levels that we haven't seen yet with this young core. If those two things can happen, I think they could be a top six seed, and that would be a very successful season, even if you don't win a playoff series. For the Nuggets, interesting offseason, second year in a row. Again, 2 years ago, you win the championship, and then you lose valuable depth, guys most notably like Jeff Green. And then this season, goes, and then you can't afford to bring back KCP. So you lose valuable bench pieces, and all you did was bring in Russell Westbrook. So going into this year, I think a successful year would be to for one or two of these bench pieces or role players to break out, to take that next step. And I'm not saying to take a step to all-star level, but to just take that next step to be such a valuable guy on a nightly basis, a guy that the Nuggets office and Mike Malone can trust. I think would be huge. So whether if that's Peyton Watson, Christian Braun, of course, Russ, he kind of is what he is at this point in time, but just one of those guys to take a step up, right? To just give this Nuggets team a valuable piece, because this Nuggets team reminds me a lot of the 2018 Cavs teams. Now, hear me out, because this is a team where they have a lot more talent than the Cavs did in 2018. But it seemed as a Cavs fan, when LeBron took a step off the court, the team was down 10. Or if they had a big lead, then the other team already caught up. The second that LeBron James took a step off the court. And this Nuggets team reminds me a lot of that, because when Jokic seemingly took a step off the court, whether if it's in the regular season or especially the postseason, they were down, and it seemed like the lead that was built when Jokic was off the court was insurmountable for them to come back and make it a game or even win the game. But ultimately, this team, I think they just need some valuable pieces around Jokic that are consistent. I didn't mention they also lost Reggie Jackson along the way. But I think a successful season would be a Western Conference Finals appearance because you have the best player in the world. I think Michael Porter can jump up to 20 points per game this year. I think Jamal Murray, you got to get back to what you were when they won the title. You got to be more consistent. You got to be a guy that can give you 25 a night, which, again, last year we didn't really have. But again, they have the roster outside of the depth aspect. Interested to see how they use Russell Westbrook. But as of right now, you have the best player in the world. Western Conference Finals is what your successful season looks like. For the Timberwolves, a team I think that kind of shot out of nowhere last year as far as we knew they would be good, but we didn't know they were going to be great. And they got all the way to being a top 3 seed in the Western Conference last year. Now, in that playoff run, it was impressive for a lot of reasons, but they started off by sweeping the Phoenix Suns. Not many times Kevin Durant's been swept in the playoffs, and that was Anthony Edwards' idol. He sweeps them in the playoffs, right? Second round, you knock off the defending champions in 7, which is very impressive. Then you go into the Western Conference Finals, and of course, you run into a man on a mission that I keep mentioning, right, in Luka Doncic. But again, even in that Western Conference Finals, a couple shots, if they go the Timberwolves' way, we're talking about the Timberwolves representing the Western Conference last year. And even as a Luka Doncic fan and a Kyrie Irving fan, I think the Timberwolves would have had a way better shot at beating the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals. But again, I think you took that step last year. Now it's time to get back to where you were, right? It's one thing to have expectations. It's another thing to live up to them. If you can get back to being, the same team you were last year and just fine tune some things along the way, maybe kind of try and figure out how do we maximize Rudy Gobert. If you could figure that out, last year he showed flashes even in the playoffs. I think making it back to the Western Conference Finals, giving Anthony Edwards a chance to be great and to take that next step, especially what we saw in the Olympic play. He was great in the Olympic play, even at 23 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, he's still super young. He's far away from even entering his prime. Of course, Anthony Edwards, he's only going to get better, as crazy as that sounds. He could be in the MVP running this year, as crazy as that sounds. But I think making it to the Western Conference Finals and just giving your team a shot to be the first ever Timberwolves team to make the finals, something special, and I think that would be a successful season. Giving your stars a shot is a trend here on today's video. Luka Doncic. Last year, this team shocked the world, even for me. And I say that because if you go back to last year's videos, I predicted the Mavericks that I said they were going to get a big at the midseason mark, and I said they were going to go to the NBA Finals. Now, I said, again, that's a lot of you guys were here for that last year. But again, I predicted that. I said, hey, they're going to go to the NBA Finals, and they're going to lose to the Boston Celtics. Did I really think it was going to happen? Part of me, no, not really. But Luka Doncic was that great, and I can recognize that as long as Luka's on the court, this team has a shot on a nightly basis, and they can go as far as Luka wants to take them. But they were just simply outmatched in the NBA Finals. I think if you put any regular Eastern Conference representative against the Mavericks, Luka might be sitting here with an NBA Finals ring, right? But at the end of the day, you brought in Klay Thompson this offseason. You bring in Najee Marshall. You lose a guy like Derrick Jones Jr., but you still have your core. And I think if you had to lose a wing on this team, I'd rather keep PJ Washington over Derrick Jones Jr. You replaced his defense is what I'm getting at. So you didn't lose much, and you still have your superstar level talent. Now, I think if we can get the Kyrie Irving from last playoff run, where he really bought into that defensive side of the ball, I think this is a team that a successful year. Put your team in his position to win. Put your team in a chance to win, which is the Western Conference Finals. Let Luka avenge what his finals loss last year. Let him have the chance to bring this team to where they haven't been, the NBA Finals, right? And to get over the hump, which is probably going to be the Celtics yet again. I can already see the script being written. I already kind of skipped to it here, but the Portland Trailblazers, I think, are the last team we have to talk about. This is a team where I think a successful year to be to find your building blocks. Like I talked about with the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets have a very good problem right now because you have two guys that can be your lead guy on a nightly basis. I think for the Trailblazers, you have so much young talent, right? You have dominating, if we still want to call him that, Scoot Henderson, right? You brought in Denny Abdia, of course. Excuse me here. You bring in a guy like Donovan Clingan. Shaedon Sharpe is another guy you can throw into the mix. You still have guys like Jeremy Grant. I think find your building blocks this year and put yourself in a situation, whether by choice or of course, just by fate. I think if you're in a position where you can grab a guy like Cooper Flagg if you can't find your number one guy, Cooper Flagg will be that guy. But I think this year, just developing some of your young players, finding out if Chauncey Billups is going to be your coach for the long run is going to be probably number 2 on your list outside of getting Cooper Flagg. And again, just continue to developing your young players and your young talent, putting yourself in a situation to get back to where you were when you had a guy like Damian Lillard. You don't want to be 13th, 13th, and 15th anymore if you're Portland, right? As a small market fan as well on the East, I understand your pain when you don't have a great roster that you have to watch on a nightly basis. But for them, again, develop young stars and figure out if Chauncey's the guy. For the Clippers, again, I I guess I'm way off here. We have to talk about a lot of teams, so we'll speed up here a little bit. You lose Paul George, but you now maybe have the deepest roster in the Kawhi Leonard era. I think for a team that has been able to get there, but they haven't been able to, win when it matters most, and a lot of that has to do with their health outside of their bubble run. But I think just to be able to get there with this deeper roster, if Kawhi can stay healthy like he was last year, but this time when it matters most in the playoffs, I think just winning a playoff series would be a successful season. I understand it's not the Larry O'Brien. I understand it's not LA standards, but for a team that has had consistent heartbreak in the playoffs year after year, just to get there without Paul George and to win a playoff series, I think would speak volumes about the LA Clippers moving forward. Excited to see what Kevin Porter can do when he comes back as well. For the Suns, look, it's year two with his big three, Matt Ishbia and James Jones. They preached all off season there is nothing wrong with the current core that we have. We just need time, and we need time to mesh, which I can understand, right? We see in history a lot of these big threes that are newly formed. They need a year, right? Bosch, the Heatles, right? They needed a year to mesh and to maximize what they could do on the court. To a lesser degree, this Phoenix Suns team last year, we saw flashes, but we never really saw the best version of these three all together at the same time. And a lot of that could be due to Bradley Beal's injuries, but regardless, this is a team that over the last 3 seasons has the most regular season wins. And that includes, again, Boston, of course, the Denver Nuggets, and of course, and pretty much all the big NBA champions over the last 3 years, 4 years, right? The Milwaukee Bucks as well. The Suns have the most regular season wins, but postseason success just hasn't been there since that 2021 season. But ultimately, I think with this core, if you can win a playoff series, give Kevin Durant a shot to push this team to the Western Conference Finals in the second round with Devin Booker, 2 top 10, top 12 players in the league, I think would be a successful season with first-year head coach Mike Budenholzer now taking over. For the Pelicans, look, you need Zion to stay healthy when it matters most. I worry about this team's center depth outside, outside of Zion and Daniel Tice and Yves Messi. It doesn't really, scream on paper that, hey, we have a center that we can rely on outside of Zion playing very small ball five. So again, I worry about that aspect of their team. But you bring in DeJounte Murray. You still have guys like Jose Alvarado, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, great role players, some of the best in the league. You have Brandon Ingram that finished the season very poorly next to CJ McCollum. But those guys, of course, they're bucket getters. We know that they could turn that switch on just like that. Right? But we need Zion to be healthy. We need him to be that top 20 level player that we know he can be on a nightly basis, but especially when it matters most in that playoff stretch. But for them, I think top 6 seed, avoid the play-in, put Zion in a position to be great in the postseason. The reason I don't have them winning a playoff series is because we haven't seen Zion stay healthy again for long stretches of time when it matters most. But as a Zion fan, right, and supporter, I hope that they can win a playoff series. I think that would be huge for New Orleans. For the Jazz, of course, same situation as I talked about with Portland. Develop your young talent. Figure out what you want to do with a guy like Colin Sexton. Figure out if the coach you have is the right guy going forward. But again, I think you made the right decision keeping a guy like Lauri Markkanen. I was happy they did that. But again, with guys like Keontae George ready to take that next step, of course, you still have veteran pieces like Jordan Clarkson along the way. Of course, Walker Kessler. I'm forgetting a lot of pieces on the spot here. But I think figure out what you want to do with Colin Sexton. You're going to have to pay him either this year or next year. So maybe we trade him. Maybe we trade him to a desperate contender like the Milwaukee Bucks and get 2 first-round picks out of Colin Sexton. Just because for right now, our timeline doesn't necessarily fit Colin Sexton's. So let's figure out what we want to do with him. For Golden State, look, just like I said for LeBron, I understand that if you just look at the roster aspect, it would really just be, hey, let's just compete, right? Let's get into the play-in, give these guys a chance. But you have Steph Curry, arguably the greatest point guard of all time. He is undoubtedly the greatest shooter that God has ever created to walk this earth. He is no doubt, of course, a top 10 player of all time in my eyes. And this is a guy that, again, it could win 5 NBA championships. He needs that fifth ring to, I think, cement himself over a guy like Magic Johnson if he's not already. But again, you have maybe the deepest roster in some years here in Golden State post Kevin Durant era. And I think, hey, to be a top 6 seed, avoid the play-in, save that extra couple games, and of course hard, I guess hard play from Stephen Curry in those play-in games. If you could be a top 6 seed, put yourself in a situation where you got to face probably one of these top dogs, but just to be a top 6 seed, give Steph Curry a chance to be great like he was in 2022. Again, 2022 they went to win the finals. You put Steph Curry in a chance to do that. And if you could do that, I think that's a successful season just to be going out or just to be able to go out and say, hey, we gave Steph Curry in this roster a chance. But here's a quick recap of everybody on your screen. And of course, all of it behind my head. Of course, I'm blocking Sacramento, Golden State, and Houston. But if you missed those, go back into the video and check those out. But that's going to do it, man. Episode 209 was a little bit of a sloppy one. So if you made it to this point, you're a true fan, and I appreciate you. But that is going to do it for today's episode. Yesterday, Wednesday, tomorrow, we have fantasy football content every single week for this NFL season. On Thursdays, we have our weekly predictions. Now, I will say it's not going to be as cut and dry as other channels here that you see on YouTube. We like to do fun games. So, for example, next week, we're going to be talking about contenders, pretenders. We like to do different games along the way. This week, of course, we're going to be talking about those 0-2 and 2-0 teams to a deeper level. So if you enjoyed today's video, of course, consider dropping a like, subscribing to the channel, supporting us down below, and hey, tell a friend to tell a friend. I don't care if you got to take your mom's phone and subscribe. Any support, of course, is appreciated. But we'll see you guys tomorrow for some fantasy football content. Until then, let me know what you think in the comments.